From Tumwater, Washington, going out to the 5 counties and beyond. No Shhh, it's the TRL Podcast. I'm Chris.
I'm Annalisa, and we are your hosts for the library podcast that talks about more than just books. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Annalisa.
We've joked about this in the past, where previous episodes we've had many guests that have the ability to fire you.
Yeah, I've been in the hot seat multiple times.
So today we have the joy of having my boss on, and I feel great about it. I don't feel like hopefully that I will not be fired after this. So, but
you have to say that.
I have to just put that out into the universe. But I'm excited to have this conversation because it's about a topic that we haven't really covered all that much on the podcast, and yet it's something that we're constantly doing at TRL, and that is the topic of remodels, refreshes, and renovations.
How we improve our physical spaces.
Right.
And why we do that.
Yes. And so who better to have to talk about this than our Director of Operations, Brenda Lane.
Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you.
Clap, clap, clap,
Happy to be
clap,
here.
Who just had to sit through our whole little spiel right there, but we tried to keep it short.
You did.
We did a wonderful job, right?
You did fantastic.
So
as
far,
always,
so good for you.
As always. Yes.
All right, Brenda, well, happy to have you on the podcast. Before we get into the topic of the day, would you describe for us what a Director of Operations does exactly?
So my job is to do many things. I wear many hats. I oversee a few departments. So I am in charge of facilities. I am in charge of human resources, finance, and also creative services, which is where Annalisa is one of my employees, and she's fabulous. So I am the person that oversees a lot of different things, and I do a lot of project management.
So a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff.
A lot of behind-the-scenes stuff.
Well, let's dig right into the topic of the day, refreshes, remodels, renovations, the what, why, and the how. And I'm excited to talk about this because it feels like we've been doing a lot more updating of our physical spaces throughout the district in the past few years than had been the case when I first started at Timberland in 2013. So when I started, maybe I just wasn't like tuned into it as much, but it definitely seems like lately we're doing a lot more of that. Would you say that's accurate?
That is very accurate.
And what would you say is the reason for that shift?
Well, I think it's a few things. The pandemic definitely launched a different thought process and a different way of thinking. The way that refreshes happened in the past, it would usually come up through some sort of an assessment that would happen, like an overall assessment. And it was usually one big major thing that would happen. And that would be like the big hurrah for a few years. We didn't do a lot of looking at spaces. We didn't do a lot of getting in and making sure things like, I call them consumables, carpet, paint,
right,
flooring, furniture, those things that get worn and you just make do, you just clean the chair one more time, or you,
shampoo
the carpet one more time,
or
or you move something over it because the stain just won't come out. And it's just one of those things that it was kind of a low priority, and we weren't doing it at all. And what was happening is we were watching our buildings just degrade, but also our furniture, our physical spaces, and things just started getting cluttered and dirty, and we started having health and safety concerns. And then, AD laws and rules change all the time. And every time we went into buildings, we were just noticing they were just starting to look very downtrodden and not current and inviting.
Yeah, well-worn.
Well-worn, yeah. And I commend staff because they made do with things that lived a lifetime and should have just went away.
Definitely got our money's worth out of some of
Definitely. So when the pandemic hit and we started having, obviously, cleaning, we were cleaning things, it became just very apparent that we had been buying things that were not holding up well. They couldn't be cleaned. A lot of things had to be clean, pulled out of the library. We couldn't use it. And that was from toys to surfaces to furniture. And that's when we started really taking a look at how we were doing things and overhauling our processes. I did a reorganization in my facilities department, and we just kind of got on that horse and just said, let's see where it's going to take us. And fortunately, it's taken us in a really, really great direction.
So kind of moving from this situation where, your building gets remodeled and then we just don't think about it for 10 years until it needs a whole full-scale remodel again, to what you're describing as a little more systematic, like making sure that the furniture gets replaced on a regular schedule, that where someone's keeping track of how worn the carpet is, that we're kind of continually looking at the physical spaces rather than just, one big thing and then we forget about it for a while.
See you in 20 years.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
you don't, I mean, some of our refreshes, some of our buildings hadn't been refreshed or remodeled or touched in 20 to 30 years. And if you think about a public library and all of the people that come through the doors of a public library, that's kind of insane.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Right? Because it's a well-used space. And that is one of the things that we're just looking at now. We're just making sure that we're meeting those metrics as far as ADA. We're meeting those metrics as far as workflow for our staff and for patrons. We're taking advantage of every inch of space that we can, because some of our rural libraries are incredibly small. They're 1,500 to 2,100 square feet. That's not a lot of room. And a lot of times that is one big room. So all of these things are happening in one big room. So we have to be more creative. We have to be more aware. We are putting in surfaces that are cleanable. We're putting in surfaces that help us get longevity out of what we're doing. And then, of course, we're constantly making sure we're going back in and making sure that we're looking at things and we are improving things as needed instead of waiting 10, 20, 30 years.
Well, I think it's interesting that your kind of experience from when you started working for Timberland is you weren't seeing these refreshes, because I'm coming up on my 2-year anniversary with TRL. And I think pretty much every 3 months since I started working here, I've gone to a grand reopening, a ribbon cutting. I'm sharing out some sort of exciting, refresh that we've done. And so that's just been the norm for me. I'm like, boy, I go to a lot of these. And I really think it's about every 3 months if I had to look at it. I've been to several in my time here. But we've kind of used these words interchangeably now. And I think that maybe we should make the distinction, because we use the word refresh a lot. And prior to working for TRL, I didn't use that word so much. So I'm curious, is there a meaningful distinction between the words remodel, refresh, renovation in your mind?
Well, there is and there isn't. And it is a very interchangeable word. Cheryl, executive director, she loves the word refresh. So refresh is you go in and you refresh everything. In my terms, a refresh is a smaller project. It may be that we go in and the children's area, the toys are looking a little worn, or the furniture's looking a little worn, and we might go in and we might do a refresh. We might touch up some paint. We might, move some furniture around. We might build an office. That might be a refresh. That's a smaller, I call everything a project. So the terms that you hear thrown around, whether it's social media, it's Cheryl out talking, it's a grand opening, those are just terms. A remodel, when somebody thinks of a remodel, it's usually when you're taking something and completely changing it. So we do a lot of that, where if a library manager says to me, I'd really, I don't have an office and I'd really love an office. Well, we're going to see what we can do to make that happen. That would be more of a remodel, and that's more of a holistic, ground up looking at those types of things. That would
the whole floor plan of a place, right?
The whole floor plan. And a renovation is more, when you think of a renovation, you're thinking like this whole big thing. And that is really more of those longer projects where you see the library's closed for 3 or 4 months. Right. And that typically is where we're redoing everything, like we did in Owaka, where we went in and it was flooring, it was lighting, it was electrical, it was adding data, it was adding everything that we could to make that space more user-friendly, which is for the patrons. It was for workflow. It's also, I get a lot of my instructions from the deputy director who's in charge of public services, because that's where, staff work. And so she's very concerned about workflow and how things work for staff and patrons. So she's really good at that. And then Andrea, who is our content and access director, she's the collection. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to get our collection, in a not only a better state that you can find things. So there's a whole big process with that. Not my rodeo. I don't
We're not going to
decide.
put you on the spot. and make you
Good,
talk
because
about
I
all
would
that.
I would fail epically at that, totally. But that's what she does. So there are certain parameters I get from different people. So when it comes to a refresh, a remodel, or a renovation, we use them interchangeably, mostly because that's just how it is. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, you could say a refresh is happening and I might do top to bottom.
Yeah, we definitely use those terms interchangeably in casual conversation. If you had to pin me down, I would say like, oh yeah, definitely the bigger ones like Olympia circa 2019. That was a remodel. Everything in there changed. Whereas what you're talking about in like the children's area, the toys get refreshed, get some new furniture. Refresh sounds a little more appropriate, but yeah, definitely I feel like I'm not that. I don't police my language that
Yes.
closely.
And they all pretty much mean the same thing. It means we're getting in there and making it fantastic. So whether it's a small little project or it's a big giant project.
How do you decide which buildings, which libraries get a refresh, a remodel, renovation? How do you decide which one is next and which one gets
Prioritize
the
that.
attention? Yeah.
All sorts of ways. So for instance, everybody every year has to put in budget requests, and the library managers do that for their buildings. And sometimes it will come through that where they say, they put in a big ticket item and we're going, what do they want for $25,000? And so we're looking,
Surprise.
we're reviewing it and we're going, oh, okay, well, and they'll outline what they want. Or it would be, we're in the buildings all the time. So it might be that I'm in the building, and so say as 3 directors, we go out there, we all have different, optics. I'm looking at certain things. Kendra's looking at certain things. We go out there and we're going, wow, this library is looking pretty dated. It's looking pretty old. The workflow isn't great. We can see that staff are doing, many steps, or it's not really great for patrons, or we might get there and be like, ADA is completely not happening here.
Ergonomics are off
Ergonomics
or
are
whatever.
terrible.
It's interesting that you say this too, not to interrupt you too much here, but because you're able to come into a building where staff are there every day and maybe have worked there for many years and see it with like different eyes.
Yes.
So even more so than a member of the public or staff who are there in the building a lot, you're able to kind of assess that from a distance and see what maybe they are overlooking.
Absolutely. And that's what I do. I look at things. I mean, it might be something as simple as there's not the required ADA area that they need to, somebody would need to turn around. Or it might be I look at the chairs and go, there is no way that somebody that had a physical disability could get in and out of that chair. So I'm looking at different things. And so when we're out in a building, we might think, okay, we need to get that on our schedule. That is one that needs to jump high in priority, because there's a lot of things, and it might be really simple to fix, and we could get in there and be in and out in a couple of weeks and get it fixed. It could be restrooms, it could be mold, it could be all sorts of things that you notice that, again, library, I mean, I will say this about library staff, they are fabulous about making do with what they have, and they really don't ask for a whole lot of things. And that's actually sad to me, because their work environment should be great, just like it should be for a patron and a family. A family should be able to come in and put their child down on the floor and not have to worry about the floor being
Disgusting.
disgusting.
You're right.
And we also, when we started doing this, we decided to put the rural libraries on our radar screen higher up so that we could get through those. because there were conversations of people saying we didn't care about rural libraries, and that isn't true. So we've put millions of dollars into rural libraries because they're important. And that was a way of saying they're not going anywhere. They're here. We're putting money into them, hopefully to give people a peace of mind also. So there's just a lot of factors that go into why and how we make decisions. It also is, we own so many of the buildings at Timberland, and the city owns so many of the buildings.
That was my next question about how that changes the process of, we don't own all of these buildings.
Yeah, I think that's something that people don't always realize about
I
how
certainly
Timberland is
didn't.
put together. And you, would you have any
No.
idea?
Well, not only did I not know that we didn't own all the buildings, it just never occurred to me to wonder about it either. I just, I was a happy library patron that was just happy that a library existed for me. And so I also understand patrons maybe not coming in and complaining about, not having that objective, because they're just kind of coming in and using what's available to them and just grateful for what's there. And then you don't even realize, like, oh, until there's a refresh, like, I didn't realize this could have been this way this whole time.
Yeah,
or,
right.
but it never occurred to me to wonder,
Well, as a library user, it's a dynamic. Why would you even...
who owns the building.
Why would you think about that necessarily? Like, oh, the city owns this building versus Timberland owns this building. Like,
Okay,
you're
that
not...
makes me feel better.
That's for those of us who work for the library to think about most of the time. Like, I can imagine no regular library user is probably typically thinking about the way that Timberland is organized like that. But it is a dynamic that plays into exactly what you're talking about here. Because when we own the space, there's a lot more agency we have over what we can do with it, what the timeline is. And also we are investing in that space, in its entirety. Whereas the libraries where the city owns the building, they impact the timeline. They actually have an obligation to maintain and upkeep that space because we're providing the service out of the building.
Correct.
But the city is taking care of the building and is expected to contribute to some of the renovations that we've done. So it'd be interesting to hear your take on how that dynamic impacts, how we prioritize the spaces and what that looks like when we actually are doing the work and cooperating with, let's say a city like Lacey versus one of the smaller rural communities that may not have the kind of resources dedicated to the library.
And resources in those smaller communities is definitely what drives a lot of our decision making on why we put the money into those buildings, because it'll probably never happen in cities where, it's hard for everybody right now. And when it comes down to city budgets and they don't have a lot of money, the library is one of the last things that, enters the budget picture for them. Emergency services, fire department, there's just things that are, salaries. A lot of budgets are very similar to ours. Our budget is 70% of our budget goes to, paying for salaries and benefits. And that is actually a pretty low number. Most budgets run around 80 to 85%. So we do really well, and we've done a really great job. And that is one of the things that when these city buildings are having the issues that they're having, I look at it, and this is where we went to the board, during the pandemic, and we asked them to make this change, because regardless of who owns the building, it's still our services, it's our employees, it's our patrons, and our name is on the door.
When you say when we went to the board to ask them to make this change, you're referring to getting the board's buy-in to allow us to contribute money to the physical spaces in buildings where the city would typically have been responsible for that.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes,
Policy
we don't own
change.
this space, but we want your, okay to invest money in these places that that yes, we don't own.
Right.
That we shouldn't have to per se, that we're not like obligated to, but like you're saying, we want people to have a good experience in all of our branches, whether we own it or not.
Yes, that's exactly it. We asked them to allow us to use the money in our building fund, which I know we'll be talking about. But that's one of the things where, again, we're trying to get across the district that you have a similar experience in our buildings. And again, having almost 30 buildings, It's a lot. And I mean, over the last 4 years, we have done a lot of refreshes, remodels, and we're getting there. We're heading into the big buildings now because we've been concentrating on a lot of the smaller rural or the buildings that were literally having safe health and safety issues.
Right.
Those were the ones we hit right out of the gate. Those were during the pandemic. And each one we improve differently, and we've structured ourselves so that we're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars doing this. And I'm pretty proud of that. So when I look at those types of things, decisions on how it comes up or why why we put it in a city building versus why we don't. A lot of it has to do with the budgets that the city has and what we plan. And some cities, for instance, we did a refresh at Tenino. We did the interior refresh a few years ago, I think 4 years ago. And then we just recently did an exterior, and it was an exterior repair and paint because there was rotting wood and they needed gutters. And so I put it in my budget, and it made a huge difference. And so there's a building that we don't own, but our name's on it, and it's important. So, I mean, I can't say enough about the board being willing to do that and how much it has helped us with our district, the updates, because if they would have never done that, I don't know where we'd be with some of our buildings right now. It was a great thing that they did when they agreed that we're all one.
Yes, it shouldn't be the case that
Yeah.
some libraries have
Yeah.
a bad experience or a worse looking library because the city can't afford to contribute the same that we can in a different library or the city in a larger building can. So then it kind of pits people against each other if you go down that path. So I agree, that's been great.
Because if you were to look at the libraries we owned, because we're 100% responsible for them, they were very well maintained. I mean, that is literally what our facility staff did, was maintain those buildings. And you started seeing the divide, and it kept getting wider and wider and wider and deeper. And that divide is much narrower now because we're getting through these buildings. And I think probably another 3 years, I believe we'll be through almost all of our buildings.
And then we'd start from
Then we'll probably
start
number one
over.
again.
Then we'll probably start back again on, but just think of, it won't be the big renos or the big remodels. It'll be more of the refreshes at that time. It'll be furniture and, making sure that the surface is
ongoing kind
right,
of stuff.
that we've put in, because that's just part of what you do as an organization. You have to take care of those buildings. They get heavily used.
You said that the way that things are structured in facilities saves hundreds of thousands. So how is it that you're saving that much money? What are you doing?
Well, that was what happened. I mean, that pandemic forced us to do a lot of things. I mean, it really did, right? I mean, it forced a lot of things. You had to think about things differently. And I was already working on a reorganization of that department anyways. So that department, operations, includes courier service. It includes janitorial for our buildings, landscape for our buildings, and then facilities and maintenance, which does all 30 of the buildings. And so what we started doing is we were thinking that if we could hire people that had the skills to do some of this instead of contracting out for 3 times the cost, sometimes 5 times the cost, some of these things could be done in a much more cost-effective way. And that is what we did. So
yeah, you've done a great job of that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I've got some great people on my team.
Let me tell you, I'm just going to interject my little
Yeah.
story about working in Olympia during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And working with the facility staff was we had to quarantine materials at that time for, I think, 48 hours or something, so they get returned, and we had to have some place to put them. And Olympia is a busy branch, so we had tons of stuff just sitting for days before we could touch it to check it in. And we needed someplace to put that stuff. And we needed these giant bins, these book return bins. And if you buy those things, they're expensive.
Very.
Like if you want something like that long term. So we talked to the facilities guys and like, this is what we need. Can you make something like this? And before long, they had like 12 of these things knocked out. Just absolutely durable, easy to move around, enormous. They went to basically Home Depot and bought the, all the wood and the paint to put it together. And it was a beautiful piece of work. And I was so impressed because that was a fraction of the cost to do that for something that we weren't going to need that long, because eventually we weren't quarantining things. And so we could do something else with these, but saved a ton of money.
That is their superpower. They are fantastic at that. And that is what we are doing we've evolved from those types of projects to just doing basic renovation, like painting. We're doing office rebuilds. We're doing flooring. We do play structures. We do feature walls, like we did at Shelton in the teen area. They wanted a wall put up that was some sort of like a divider, but they didn't want it to be behind a wall. They wanted it to still be something really cool. So the staff person there, Steven, he shows me a picture on his phone. He's like, I would really like something like this. And I'm like, we can totally do that. So we build this divider wall. It has these huge circular windows in it with LED lights and this archway through it. And it is so freaking cool. And
it's so unique. Cool, and
right?
Until now, I did not put together that it was our facility staff that made that, because it is very unique. I've not seen it anywhere else. And, on the topic of Shelton, we talk about this in, I think, episode 2 of the podcast when we were talking about children's spaces, which you mentioned. There is a ginormous sunken pirate ship in the Shelton branch downstairs. It's really quite amazing. And if you haven't gone, you should. Our staff built that.
And our staff built that from a photo that I gave. I said, hey, Skylar, this is what I'm thinking. And I gave him this. We blew it up. You guys printed it out for us and, big, blew it up. They put it on the wall out in the shop and he built it off of that photo.
I cannot imagine.
Insane, right?
So can you even give me a ballpark of what that would have cost if we would have contracted a project like that out?
It would have easily been $200,000. They built it for less than $25,000 for materials start to finish. The wave wall that we did at Westport, I wish you guys could have seen how I would say to Kendra and I are saying to Skylar, well, we want it to be a half wall, but we want it to be a wave, and we want it to be and we're like, to make it a wave. And he's just, and so he drew a couple things out and he said, so do you want it to be this kind of a wave or this kind of a wave? And we're like, oh no, that kind of wave. And he goes off and he said, can you come out and look at this? And I'm just going, that's what my brain was saying, build. But I poorly articulated that, of course, but he built that and it's amazing. And then I walk in and they've put the bubble holes in and they've put the plexi in and it just takes it. And it was a couple $100. And Kendra and I went on a site visit to Spokane and we were looking at a library that had done a lot of these play structures, and we're talking millions and millions of dollars that they spent on this.
Right. I think they have one in 7 branches or something like that.
And we asked the staff, and they were saying, one building alone I think they said they spent $4 million overall for these structures. And I'm looking at them going, our staff can build that. They've built the same types of things that we can order that, there's these trees that they build and they're these very Scandinavian basic tree. We used them at Owako, and we used them at West Olympia, and they were $5,000 a piece. They built them for $200. And when you put them next to each other, you would not be able to tell. Yeah. That is when I talk about the stuff that we're doing now. The baby corrals, those are $15,000. we built it for less than, I think it was $900 in materials. Those are the things that we have evolved to now. And we just, every year they are willing to do something additional. And I'm an idea person and I'm a problem solver, and I'm going, wouldn't it be great if we're able to do this? So now we have entered where we are redoing shelving and end caps and making sure that we use those materials that were bought through its life cycle as far as we can to save money. That is just one way that we're doing it. But hiring people that can do all of these types of things, and not only can they build walls and all the other things that they've done. I mean, I sometimes I forget all the things they do. And
the practical stuff is less shiny than
it is
the
less
creative, the pirate ships and things of that nature. Yeah.
Right. But they've built a lot of offices. They've put up, I mean, our building here, when we need additional office space, they're the ones that come in and put a wall up or take a wall down or add a door or move a door or put a window in or change a window. I mean, those are the things that they're doing that are saving money all the time, so that money can go into other things that are outward facing, really important to us as an organization.
You talk about I like idea generation for things like the structures in Westport or Shelton, but we do a lot of stuff like build offices. You were saying we move shelving around and look at the whole layout of a building. Where do those ideas come from? I know you can walk into a space and you can say, well, the furniture needs to be replaced here. The shelving is kind of worn, and those things are probably pretty obvious. If a building has ugly looking paint, that's clear as soon as you walk in there. But in terms of how to use a space, where are we getting those ideas? In terms of what's the best way to utilize this particular building's floor plan layout.
It comes from a lot of different places, but it mostly comes from the communities. I've heard this here and there about we're trying to make all of our buildings look cookie cutter and corporate, I think is some of the terms that I've heard.
Oh, it looks like a doctor's office in here or whatever. Well, you got to be able to clean the chairs in a doctor's office too. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, we try to avoid those. I try to choose things that are very on trend, but in a way that is neutral, that I'm going to be able to get many, many years out of, say, a paint color or a flooring. So we don't pick weird patterns on carpets anymore. It's not a cruise ship or a casino. We don't do that. You're going to get a pretty basic. And where I want to see the life brought into the building is, through furniture, through all of the other things that are added that staff bring. I don't do like the children's area and stuff. There's a team that, that's what they're trained on. That's what they do.
Staff who do that. And
they do that
basically.
Right. And so if somebody comes to me, and it's usually the library manager, because how a process starts for any type of a refresh remodel is that I go out and I meet with the library manager. They're the person in the building all the time. They know their community. They know what they want, yada, yada. And I'll sit down and I'll say to them, so tell me what you're thinking. And they'll start telling me. Sometimes they'll walk me around and say, well, I'd really like this and this doesn't work. And I said, okay, if you could have anything that you want, what would you like? And I'll use this example because this happened in Shelton with Erin, who is the library manager. And she said, I'd really like a play structure. And I said, well, I'm dying to put a play structure in a library. I really want to put a play structure really badly in a library. And I said, so what are you thinking? And she goes, well, I'd really like a pirate ship. I'm like, okay, we can do that.
I did not know that.
Right.
That it was Erin that.
She looks at me, she's like, really? And I'm going, yeah, I would love to do that. Love to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's organically how a lot of these things happen. So Ilwaco was one, which I thought was interesting. The library manager at the time, I would have thought it's an oceany library. I would have thought they would want an ocean theme. And I get there and I'm like, okay, so I'm thinking maybe these colors and she goes, well, I really don't want to do an ocean theme. She goes, the ocean's right here. People can go see the ocean any old
See
time.
the real thing right
It's
across
right
the
there.
street,
I don't
basically.
really want an ocean in the library. And I'm like, okay,
fair.
what are you thinking? She goes, well, I love the trees that were at West Olympia and I'd really like to do a woodland theme. And I really want kind of that earthy. And I'm like, cool. That's where it started. That's where it came from. And then, so we've got these weird columns and I'm going, wouldn't that be cool if we made that into a tree? Because I had seen a photo of this really cool tree. And so I said to the library manager, so I'm thinking we'll do this and then we'll do that. And then she's like, I'd really like a reading cubby. I'm like, okay, so we build a reading cubby. All of these things just organically happen. And that is how I pick colors. That's how I pick textures. That's how I pick flooring and wall. All of it just happens based off of what they ask us for. But I don't go in there with a specific idea per se. I don't live in the community. I don't know what they're famous for. I don't know what exactly the library manager may want. So, for instance, I listen and then I make their possibilities happen. And if they say to me, I'd love a light bright wall, cool. They're not that difficult. They're a wood box with some lights
And pegs.
and some pegs.
Yeah.
So we're building those now too. So our library staff get these things that we can do for half the cost. They don't have to say, I can't afford that. It's not in the budget. It's too expensive. We're like, we can do that. We can do that. But that's how ideas start. And that's how and do I run with some of them once, and then we talk all the time. Kendra talks, Andrea, we all talk about all these things. Admin talks, PSMs talk, library managers talk. We all have these conversations throughout.
So it's very collaborative.
It is very collaborative. Now, those are when we're doing refreshes and remodels. Now, when we build a new building, like the one we're building in Mountain View, prior to that building being built, we did a community survey where we asked the community, what do you want? What do you want in a library? Now, in that community survey, do we say, what color paint do you want? No, of course not.
No one's going to be able to agree on that anyway.
Correct. We can't do those decisions by consensus. It's never going to work. So they've left a lot of that to me, and I work directly with the library manager on site. And if they said to me, if I said, I usually lay out, this is the flooring, I lay out kind of a schematic and say, this is what I'm thinking. If they don't like it, then I'll change it. I don't have a problem doing that. I've done it many times. We might go lighter, we might go darker, we might do another color altogether.
In your office, there is usually paint swatches
everywhere. Yeah.
And I think, I don't want that job because I'm terrible at picking paint colors.
Me neither.
And I was going to say to you, I mean, you kind of already said what I was going to ask you, which is that, you do a lot of project management, but I think this also gets to serve the very creative side of you too, these refreshes and renovations. And do you enjoy that aspect of your job, getting to be creative and have these ideas?
I do. I mean, sometimes I make a choice and I think to myself, is this the right choice? And then I see it and it's like, yes, it was. But I mean, I doubt myself too, but in the end, it's usually paint and, it's really easy to change paint. And flooring, I stick with a lot of, very neutral colors because they're going to have a longevity factor.
Right.
So if you pick a really good, base, then libraries can be as colorful or as not as people want them to be. Your tones are, if you keep them warm rather than cold, then people do feel it's a more comfortable space. So I do tend to lean more on
Color theory.
Right?
I guess I don't know anything about that.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's just like, people like to be comfortable in libraries and think it's a great place. If you choose, colors that are cold, then people tend to feel it's not as welcoming and it's not as comfortable. So, we do lean towards that when we're looking at things. It's just, it's a consensus of a lot of us just talking, and we all collaborate. And It really is important to me to get that feedback from the library manager because they know their community. And when we come up with like an idea, because again, not all these buildings look the same. I think if you actually went through our renovation videos or went back and looked, you would see every single building has its own personality.
They definitely do.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. So, because I'm just kind of reiterating what's already been said, but it's an interesting kind of balance of having each library have their own identity because of their community, because of what they're known for, what's important to them, but then also making sure that they have the experience that TRL wants, a quality experience, the good services that we want them to have. We all want them to have, just because you live in this city or this city doesn't mean that you don't have a good experience at the library. So there's that common thread there while still having the identity of their own kind of branch. And I think that's a hard balance to do.
Yeah.
And that's what we're aiming for, I think, is what it sounds like.
We are. And some staff, we're getting ready to start renovation in January at Tumwater, and
That's my branch.
Yeah, right. And which is a large branch, and it's very exciting. But the theme of that came from the library staff. It didn't come from me. It's a great theme, and I love it. But those are the things that happen, and that's why when I hear that we were making things look corporate and all the same, like cookie cutter. None of our buildings look, there's not one paint color. Everything is curtailed exactly to that building, that community, that want there. We want the experience that if you wanted to go to all 29 of our branches, you're going to see Timberland, but you're going to see a different experience every single one of those buildings. And that is what we're banking on. We're not building a pirate ship everywhere. Not every library could handle.
You get a little pirate ship fatigue after a while.
Yeah. It's like we have a pirate ship and it's great. And the thing about that pirate ship, when Shelton decides that, 5 years down the road that they don't want that pirate ship anymore, we took it apart to put it in, we'll take it apart and take it out. And we could repurpose it. We could put it somewhere else. We could break it all down and make something else out of it because that's the kind of stuff we're doing now. It's not a $50,000 to $100,000 piece of equipment,
right,
or play structure or anything that we've purchased.
Yeah, you can say some of the same thing about like some of the furniture and the desks that we've been using lately too, which you've seen. Some of those be moved from branch to branch because they are more modular. They're not bolted to the floor. They're not, these giant like fortress desks. So you can actually, save money that way too. I've seen that happen. You buy a desk one place, and when the building layout changes or they outgrow that particular desk, you can move it to a different branch or to a different branch from there. Same thing with the furniture where, you don't have a bright green chair that matches the aesthetic in one library, but not any of the other ones. You can actually kind of repurpose this stuff and get more life out of it. And, as I'm also a taxpayer in addition to working for the library, and I like to see the library, think in a financially responsible way about some of that stuff and not have to rebuild a multi-$1,000 desk every few years because the needs of the library change.
Right. Because I don't think people realize that those desks are $25,000 to $30,000. They're not cheap. And that is our next phase. That's the next phase I want to move into with my operations department, is actually building these things that we are now purchasing, the display units for books. And
you're going to upscale these guys so much
I know
that they're going to start doing independent contracting.
No. I make sure we keep them happy. They love it here.
Don't get any ideas.
But yes, those. Again, that continuous improvement is really important too. So for where we started, with the pandemic was just cleanliness and getting buildings kind of where they should be, health and safety wise. And now we're looking at how do we continuously and use those same, because once the building, how do we just keep evolving. And this is the next for me is some of these basic things that we pay $7,000-$8,000 for these display units. We know we can build it for less than $500. same exact thing. Why
and
not?
it can be more customized to meet our specific needs.
Exactly.
I've been in a branch situation where we're looking at display units and shelving and trying to get feedback from staff about which of these 10 choices from this company can we go with, and none of them are meeting our needs exactly, but which one is the one that's going to get closest to what we want, and if we can just do that stuff in-house, then you can get exactly what you want.
Exactly.
And for less money too. So that's, I don't work in the branch anymore, but I got to imagine that's a very welcome change.
To be able to customize it to the size you need and not have to wait 6 months for it to show up.
Exactly.
That is priceless. And that is, again, it's a cost savings. It is, it is just something that we are evolving to in order to save, money. And because that money stretches that much further if we're not spending $20,000 on a desk and we're spending, $1,500. And then if we need it somewhere else, we move it somewhere else. Everything's very mobile. We do a lot of that now. So that is, that again, that's the important part of what we're doing here in this department.
We talked about saving money and covered a lot of ground there. But one thing we haven't really touched on that you did mention earlier is the building fund. And I think that's an important thing to talk about because a lot of the money that comes for these projects, these sort of one-off expenses, comes from the building fund. And that's a part of the library budget that's different than the general fund where the salaries and benefits money comes from. Can you speak a little bit to what is the building fund and why is that important in this conversation?
So the building fund it's one of those special purpose funds that you take during budgeting, and it's a percentage, it's a policy that the board has, and you put a percentage of the money into almost like a save, if we're just basically a savings account.
Right.
And so that is where that money comes from. So over the years, Timberland, as we talked about earlier, was not doing a lot of these types of things. So that account had a lot of money in it. And as a taxpayer, which again, we're all taxpayers, we've got this big giant amount of money and it's not being used. That doesn't look super great.
Yeah, we're not a bank.
Right. Right. We should be utilizing the money. So we did say to that, we need to start using this money. And that was just how it evolved. But that, we spend money out of it, but we are also continually always putting money back into it. So it's just one of those special purpose accounts. And that's what we do is we budget the projects. When we go into budget season, we look at all the projects that we're thinking about, have been asked for, we've prioritized or coming down the road, and we look at that pot of money and we budget the projects that we can get to. Some years I'm going to be able to get to a lot of little projects or a lot of medium-sized projects. This coming up year, I've got 2 large projects and 1 medium to large project. So we'll be doing 3 larger projects opposed to 5 or 6 smaller ones. And then we'll fit smaller things in between when we can.
So we've talked so far about how we plan for renovations, remodels, and how we kind of are trying to work towards creating an ongoing plan to keep doing this stuff every year consistently to keep the spaces, nice and inviting and welcoming. But what we haven't talked about is dealing with the unexpected. So every now and then some sort of major occurrence happens where a building needs a big repair, or we, discover that, there's some mold in the basement, for example. How do these unexpected projects and expenses factor into the planning for, our regular updates?
Well, I put in a contingency or an emergency budget line item that is where we would pull from if we had an emergency. For instance, if we had a roof repair that we didn't know we had, or something pops up like an HVAC system gives out. Typically, those things are going to be known factors to us. In the past, we have used our emergency funds very little. Like this year, I've only used $12,000 of the $175,000 that has been budgeted. And that is pretty typical because we have done a really good job of auditing our buildings and knowing what is happening in them. So, and these are the buildings that we own. So if it's one of our buildings, it's in a planning, that's in budgeting when it gets to my budget, that would be a line item. I would be, we need.
The HVAC's looking kind of shaky here,
Right.
so you can anticipate that kind of thing.
Right. And we want to replace it. It's 30 years old. North Mason's a perfect example. It's 30 years old. The boiler went out last year. We know that if we don't make these repairs, something catastrophic is going to happen. So it gets budgeted and then it gets repaired. Service center, we had kind of the same thing. We had some HVAC units that went out. And fortunately, we had budgeted because we're aware of the life cycle because of the audits that we're constantly doing on our buildings. So I feel really good about that if an emergency does pop up, we've got it covered.
Well, we've taken up a lot of your time today, but this is a little bit of a teaser for hopefully an upcoming episode and something that we would be remiss if we didn't. We've talked about it a little bit, but how we have kind of a major thing coming up, which is a brand new library opening up in Randall. It's the Mountain View branch, and it's not a renovation. It's not a remodel. It's from the ground up, a building from scratch. So first of all, to kind of segue from what we were just talking about, how does that get approved budget wise to not, to build a completely brand new building? What was the process of that like?
Timberland I've been at Timberland since 2010. As long as I can remember, 20 plus years, they had been looking for a piece of property in Randall to build a building. Couldn't find anything in Randall, never could find anything. And, I was able to make that land purchase happen. And it was a lovely couple who the property was not for sale, but it was in the exact chef's kiss area that we need to be, right by the school.
Yeah, it's a great location.
It is just every, time we drove up and down that highway, it's like, that's where we want to be. That right there is where we want to be. And I met with them, and they approached me and said that they would love to sell us up the property that this hotel motel sat on. They were not, it wasn't for sale. That, there were some things we had to do. It took a little bit longer than, anticipated to get everything through. But the fact that this couple wanted this legacy in this community was really wonderful. And to be able to, work with them, it was a very interesting process. A lot of emails and phone calls, and having to help through the process. We were able to procure this land, and that is really almost all of the battle in this in building a building in a location like this, is finding a piece of property that is out of the floodplain. It's not down some random highway.
It's
out
very visible.
Right out in the middle of nowhere where people have to travel to. It's on that main highway. So there were a lot of things that we needed to have, and this just checked all the boxes. And once we were able to get that property, then it just was, it had to go through the board, and we had a board member who had previously asked us to set aside $1 million in the chance that we ever were able to build a library in Randall. So that money was sitting over in the building fund, earmarked for that.
Got it.
And then the process with just public works and, RFPs and RFQs and all of that just starts happening.
That's when I start to zone out a little.
Yeah.
Yes. And it
When
just
you throw the acronyms
You can
in.
fast forward through this part.
Right. You just have to have all of those pieces just fall into place. And then there's, obviously approvals that have to happen with the board and conversations, and you still got the people in the community that want certain things. So there's just a lot of factors and that come at you when you're trying to build a building from ground up in a small rural community. But we are ahead of schedule.
I was just going to say that. And yet we are ahead of schedule.
It is. I was up there last week and it is looking so fabulous. I am so excited for this community. I am so excited for the play structure that's going inside. Just the outside, the inside, all of it's got to drive through.
Well, no spoilers.
I'm excited.
We're hoping to get up there ourselves and do a little introductory episode eventually.
Yep.
That's a spoiler. You just gave a spoiler.
You
said no spoilers.
Okay,
but
fine.
One last thing, because maybe this is like kind of a tidbit in the spoiler and like something special for our listeners, or maybe we'll cut it out entirely. I don't know. You said, and so because you said it, I feel like I can ask it. You said that there has been a theme chosen for the Tumwater branch.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what that is.
I do.
Can we hear it?
Do you want to hear it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be fairy tale and
Ooh.
castle, and we're really excited about it because they've got this.
In the room.
Well, they've got the room, but they've got this big, like old-fashioned clock thing that's in the middle.
Oh, you're making the clock work.
That's my superpower, is making things work. So it's going to be that area is going to, what we're thinking is almost like, how would you say, so you've got like the entryway into the castle, but then, what's outside is, that area that people mill around. I don't know what do you call it in castle? Courtyard, maybe. Yeah. I mean, whatever that area is before you.
I think that you're right. I think it's courtyard.
Belle and the Beauty and the Beast, and I'm thinking, the market and the French bread.
The place where the people are.
Yeah, that whole thing. So whatever that is, that is what we're doing, and it's very exciting because we haven't done that theme before. Mm-hmm. We haven't done it, but there's gonna be a castle in there.
Oh my gosh, so exciting.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Well, you heard it here first. Breaking news on the podcast. Yeah. We don't get to do that very often. We don't.
So by the time you hear this, it'll still be breaking news because this is 2025, right? So
yeah, it starts in January, and
excellent.
Our goal is to January through May because we want the library to be back open for summer SLP. I believe that we're going to try to work out of the meeting room and still provide services. So staff is working on that plan right now. Any opportunity we have to do that, we do it. So
very cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome
for spending this time with us. This is certainly such a worthy topic and something that is just very timely always because it's ongoing. So
yeah. Very cool. We appreciate it. And
we hope you'll come back for the special Mountain View episode.
That's right. We'll see you in Mountain View.
Whoop, whoop. I'm there.
All right. Thanks, Brenda.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode. Don't forget to follow or subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners.
You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Timberland Library. If you have any questions or comments, you can email us at trlpodcast@trl.org.
Original music is by our very own librarian and talented musician, Stefan, at the Elm Branch.
Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep the conversation going. Thank you for being a part of the TRL community.